Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Awaken Empowered podcast. I'm Micheila Sheldan. I'm here with Ethann Fox. And in our last podcast, we discussed navigating Saturn Neptune and some of the challenges we may be facing as humans as we transition to the fifth dimension, which might be far easier with a very good relationship. Someone who's standing by our side, who thinks the same way we do and can support us as we are all in the midst of this turbulence together. Yet, unfortunately, what I'm finding and what others I think are noticing is it's more the case not to be in a relationship at this moment, or to be in a relationship that isn't necessarily supporting you the way that you believe is best. So we thought we'd tackle this conversation in a podcast today.
Well, we didn't really plan it this way, but when the show comes out, it'll be Sweetest Day. So sort of appropriate to be discussing this topic. But what Micheila is saying is definitely true, and most of us know the statistic, especially in Western countries. I'm not really sure about less developed countries, although in China I do follow quite extensively. But the problem of relationships is a global situation in recent decades, and probably a lot of it is, obviously a lot of it's been orchestrated by our governments and institutions and so on. In China, for example, they had the one-child-only policy, so a lot of the parents in the last many decades, if they had a female child, they aborted that child. So there's an abundance of men in China and not very many women for them. So a lot of men are alone, and there's because of the economic environment there now, a lot of people are struggling and not getting into relationships because the women want men with money, and the men won't have the confidence to ask someone into a relationship unless they have money. So there's a lot of complications there. Bring into that the high divorce rate that we have globally, especially in Western countries. And also there's the prevalence these days of new technologies like artificial intelligence. For example, some of you may not know, but there are AI girlfriends you can have now who you can chat with online, who can carry on conversations with you and from what I understand, to a great extent, from a conversational standpoint, seem like a real person on the other end. And as that develops further, we also we have now artificially intelligent avatars or virtual girlfriends you can have on various online platforms like OnlyFans. So we have a large portion of the generations, especially the younger generations, who are turning to AI for girlfriends or relationships and partners. So, and then, of course, we have a great number of the people, especially in the spiritual community, who are in relationships with partners who may not match the same consciousness level as them. So globally, with all of these, and especially another factor that's going to only accelerate, and of course, in the last few years, now we have vaccinated, unvaccinated people, or people who are on one side of the politics or the other, who wouldn't intermingle with each other. So that brings another level of complication that brings challenges into relationships as well. So there's so many things that are problematic in our society that are, and many of these things are being created artificially from our governments or through propaganda, through various agencies like the CIA in the United States, for example, Planned Parenthood. All of these various institutions are creating these ideologies that are causing these problems in society, that are continuing to perpetuate it. And of course, when you have an economic climate like we have now, and that we're heading into a depressionary environment, relationships tend to struggle even more during depressionary environments. Now, on the tail end of that, maybe it will cause a solution to emerge, but while going into economic difficulties, we tend to have worse situations in relationships. So we're kind of in this environment globally where there are so many factors that are interfering with having balanced, harmonious relationships. And even although artificially intelligent girlfriends in some respects can maybe satisfy some of the emotional needs of the people who are, or even artificially intelligent boyfriends, although I imagine it's mostly men taking advantage of these types of relationships. I'm sure it can satisfy some of the emotional needs, but as human beings, having a relationship with an artificial intelligence is not going to satisfy the needs of that human soul developing in a human journey. So we have many factors that are at play that are heading us down a direction where human society is continuing to degrade. And I think at the very fundamental level, if we can't repair relationships, then we can't really repair society.
So many different angles that we can take and, viewpoints we can look at as we talk about relationships. But when you're talking about all these things, the first thing that comes to my mind is how important relationships are in terms of us feeling empowered and having the capability to walk through difficult times as one. Because if we're moving into a period of unity consciousness, it really isn't just about community. I think it really has to start within the home. But if we go back to many of the channelings that we've been doing on the Channeled Revelations show, the basic premise is weakening humanity. So if we do not have strong relationships, we all as individuals become a weaker expression of our soul vibration. And, some people won't receive that well because, we've been taught that, we have to love ourselves and we are the ones who are creators. And all of that is true. Yet those of us who are in this community who've studied the channeling and a variety of other things know that in ancient civilizations, those partnerships were revered for the purpose of leading communities through challenging times or manifesting on behalf of both parties something that was necessary to further their missions. So if we're going into a period of purpose where those of us in this community are stepping into roles of way showers or even changing those roles, it's going to be really important for us to also consider the partner that we're with or the absence of a partner, I think. And I'm really, really seeing that in my private sessions and in my inner circle community. I get more questions about relationships than I do anything else. And unfortunately, what I've been seeing with a lot of women that make up the bulk of my followers is that their relationships seem to be falling apart. And I think it is reminiscent of what's going on in what we call the third dimension that we're leaving behind, because many of these relationships were built on not only a false premise and idealistic beliefs about what relationships should be, but they didn't have the foundation necessary to carry us through this transition. So ultimately, in a partnership, I think what's going to be really important is the resilience of being able to change, both internally, externally, and for the world to change, and both parties to still be committed to that relationship, which isn't something that we're necessarily seeing, so much anymore. And I can relate to the spiritual divide that's going on in partnerships because that also happened in my personal life. And I've told this story before that when I awakened to my channeling gift, I was with a partner who had a really hard time accepting this new part of me and had a even more difficult time walking this path that I was stepping onto. So naturally the relationship had to fall apart. And after all the channeling I've done, I've really gained a new and interesting perspective about what soul contracts or soul partners are. We think they are individuals that we have pre-planned to meet as a part of our destiny to carry us to the next level. And I don't think it's as specific as that necessarily. I think there are a variety of different partners and people that can come in to meet us at our personal level of ascension. So as partners come in and out, it's typically because something within us has changed. And that vibration is calling the next level partner that's able to carry us to the extent of ascension that we haven't gotten to yet. And that's such a different viewpoint, I think, as to how we see relationship today, where there's this ideal partner who looks a certain way and who does certain things and complements things about us. But the second we put all of those conditions out there, we're really negating what our soul and the infinite intelligence of our higher self understands is important for our evolutionary journey. So I think all of that actually comes into play as well.
Well, if you're not an astrologer or even a numerologist of some form, or use some kind of form of divination to be able to see the different influences in one person's life journey versus another, then you may not be aware of the nature of what I'm going to mention here. But what I've noticed over the decades of studying cycles is that every person has a certain, well, not just person, animals, cars, anything. We all have birth charts, and birth charts will show us what our journey is meant to be, including challenges along the way and things like that. But it also shows us how we interact with the world outside of us. So nothing is more prevalent or significant in that interaction outside of us than the person who's closest to us in our lives. Now, maybe growing up as children, those would be our parents or siblings. But once you're in a relationship or marriage, it would be that partner that you're with who would show up as that primary influence of the outer world in your human journey. So if you have an astrology chart that is afflicted in a particular way, which all of our charts have difficult influences in conjunction with easy ones. Some people have more difficult influences than others, and some have more easy influences than others, but we all have those areas where we're here to learn and grow through challenging circumstances. And those challenging circumstances, whatever they are in your chart, will always manifest through the partners you attract or don't attract. And so it's easy for us to blame the other person we're with and say, oh, that person is this way and that's why the relationship sucks, or it's not my fault, it's their fault, or even the whole idea of, I see a lot of people not only in the spiritual community, but I think it's very prevalent in those self-improvement communities where we feel like if we just take another class in that area, we're going to be good at that thing. So if we just take another class on attracting soulmates, or if we just take another class or go through a couple of years of hypnosis, we can repair all of our psychological traumas from childhood and past relationships. And as a result, we're going to be perfect and we're going to attract the perfect soulmate. It doesn't really work quite like that. Not that those things are not useful, but I think in order to repair whatever psychological traumas or even ancestral traumas you may have, you can certainly go back into the past and work on those things. But if you're not, in the meantime, working on them in your physical life at the same time, you're not going to make progress. You can't solve those problems by not being in a relationship. You have to solve them by being in a relationship and even attracting partners who may push those buttons in those areas in order to help you to evolve and grow. So to some extent, we have to take the risk and be out there and struggle and face those challenges and come out better. And in that way, I think even if you have someone who's going through a series of bad relationships, as long as each time they're improving, each new relationship will get better and better. And that's how you get, of course, if you're not learning and evolving and improving, then of course they won't improve. But that is, I think, one of the most important ways to continue to improve in a relationship. So soul contracts and soulmates are not this idealistic, blissful relationship where you're going to get swept off your feet and everything's perfect because that person is now in your life. If your chart is afflicted in certain areas, your soul contracts are going to be with partners who push those areas of your life where you're here to evolve and grow. So if you don't know what those areas are, if you haven't studied your astrology or numerology or other modalities or gone to somebody who can explain those things to you, then it's easy for us to point the finger at the other person and say, well, they're the one who's at fault. And not that they're not at fault, but they are how they are because you chose to have that experience, or else they wouldn't be there. Now, that having been said, as you evolve as a soul, those areas of challenge in your chart will continue to soften and improve. But you can't really do that by not being in a relationship. You may have to just, get down into the mud and deal with those circumstances in a very physical, tangible way while being in a relationship, and then continuing to improve as you do that. So we have to always consider the karmic implications of our cycles and our birth charts that we were born with, and how those karmic implications will attract certain kinds of relationships and soulmates to fulfill those journeys that we came here to have. And so we can't avoid those things, but we can go through them and evolve and improve. And as we do, each new relationship improves, or that relationship you're in will improve. I found that to be true. If somebody continues to evolve, but the relationship doesn't evolve with them, oftentimes the relationship will fall away, and you'll find yourself in a better one. And one measure that I've seen, for example, if somebody has the planet Uranus going through their 7th house in their chart, I've seen that as almost always a breakup of the relationship or marriage, and in order for something new to come in. So you'll often see that in people's charts as well if you follow astrology closely enough. Or in the very least, that relationship will evolve and change and may become something better. So there are no accidents to where we find ourselves in terms of relationships. We always have to consider the larger implications of our soul's journey. And if your soul came here to experience being alone because that was something you wanted to experience, then no amount of classes on soulmates or anything else is going to change that. Doesn't mean you'll be alone your whole life. You could even be married and still feel alone. But I don't think that really encompasses a large amount of the population. There may be some people on the planet who came here to experience that. But I think on the whole, the majority of people could be in a relationship. But we always have to consider these dynamics of the interaction of our astrology, numerology, and other charts interaction with each other, and how that will orchestrate how those relationships actually play out, whether positive or negative.
In the book, the guides say there's no more perfect decision that we make before coming to Earth than our incarnation date, because it's somewhat like a portal and it's facilitating the experiences on our behalf, which includes every relationship. So it's always perfect in terms of the situations we find ourselves in. Not that trauma and abuse are perfect. So when we're talking about physical abuse, these are patterns that are collective. And I think we really have to keep that in mind. And it can be helpful if you're working through trauma in relationship to remember that the lack of love perpetuated through generations is what shows up in the ego that inflicts pain on another. And so we're typically experiencing those things because we are here to be a healer of them on behalf of humanity, whether that is we are choosing to heal ourselves and through relationship to expand the very definition of love, or we're literally taking that experience to the greater collective and somehow meant to teach or heal and transmute it. But I think it's important to address the idea of soulmates and twin flames, because I know we'll get this question and everyone's really interested. And I've done a lot of channeling on it. And I've really, through my own relationships, kind of come up with a slightly different definition than what others might consider. And what the guides typically say is that a soulmate is more of an earthly type of connection, where a twin flame is a cosmic connection. But I don't think that necessarily applies only to past lives, meaning, a soulmate is only someone we've been with in other earthly lives, where a twin flame is someone we've only experienced lives on other planets with. What I've learned is that a soulmate relationship is really more grounded in terms of the self, because we're trying to break apart the ego that's blinded us from actually seeing the other. And soulmate relationships, I do not think are easy. I think they can be some of the most painful relationships because they are based on some of the most challenging karmic themes that couples have had to deal with throughout history. But a twin flame relationship is a bit different. And I'm going to use us as an example because it isn't that the problems aren't there. What Mary says is many on the planet are searching for the perfect love. There is no perfect love. You're searching for the one that loves despite imperfections. And those imperfections are usually triggering something within us. So, for example, in many of my past relationships, I faced a great deal of betrayal, lies, and I learned not to trust myself, and I built up walls to trusting other people. What a twin flame relationship will do is not take those pains away or those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings away, but provide someone who's willing to work through it with you. And it takes you out of the ego and the singular perception where we're arguing, I think, with each other. And it really softens the ability to work through these issues without dissent or difficulty. And again, it's not to say that there isn't difficulty that is going to happen, but the relationship grows with each individual to the degree that each individual is willing to be fully transparent about their past, how they feel in the moment, how the past is affecting the present moment. And I think that's the key. So if we look at the way the earth is transitioning right now from the third to the fifth dimension, it makes a soulmate versus a twin flame that much more clear, I think, because we've really been focusing on societal programs, ideals, acceptance when it comes to relationships. We have also been hiding ourselves, parts of ourselves that we did not believe would be accepted by others. And that's the cornerstone of many of the relationships today that are falling apart. Things are hidden and not accepted in each other. And there are secrets, which I do not believe can be a part of any good relationship at all. But as we move into the fifth dimension, the twin flame is more of a cosmic love because those things don't stand in the way of us being able to live together and support each other in our unique missions, creativity, purpose, without having to constantly put karma in the way, right? Or have that stand in the way of what we're here to accomplish and how we're here to evolve.
Another factor that you sort of touched on a little bit is some of the programs in society. And we're only now starting to realize that the women's liberation movement, as an example, was really not about independence and freedom for women, but is really about splitting the family and taking kids out of the care of the parents and moving them into an educational system at a younger age where they can be programmed and brainwashed into the society we live today. So now we're in modern times seeing the maturation of that women's liberation movement, where we have a society where people are largely divorced and alone, and where women have been pushed into the workforce. And so, a lot of that was also for tax purposes. So more Americans would pay taxes. Now, globally, this may be different in your area, but in the U.S. anyway. And I'm sure there were some factors globally that sort of matched the same pattern. But here, that was a circumstance since the 1970s until now. And now we know that it was a CIA operation, and we also see the same agendas in place today. So we have a society today where men and women can't relate or can't be in relationships because women have gone so far toward the masculine side and men have gone so far toward the feminine side that we don't have those psychological differences anymore that really attract us to each other. And I think those are important factors because even though a lot of men believe that women want men with money, but really it's not about the money, and it's not even necessarily about the attractiveness itself. It's really about that sense of confidence and strength and masculinity that men used to have in decades ago that has been fading more and more. And some of that is societal conditioning. Some of that is also diet. It could also be plastics in the water. So many factors that have increased estrogen levels and reduced testosterone levels in men. And also with women, hormone levels are out of balance as well. So we see so many circumstances in society that have changed what human beings are. We've been sort of altered genetically to a point where we're not, that's another factor that's causing us to not be able to function well in relationships as well. And you also mentioned the ancestral patterns as well. And I think that's especially in the spiritual community, we tend to focus a lot of energy and attention on spiritual practices and modalities in order to go into the past and repair things. So we have a lot of ancestral modalities out there to repair our ancestral patterns. And certainly, in most cases, if you have a health problem or a psychological problem or a relationship problem, drinking problem, any one of those things, quite often there is an ancestral lineage of that. And also for spiritual gifts and things like that too. Oftentimes those are ancestral. So we get more from our parents and grandparents than just their physical looks. We get those psychological patterns. So if your parents grew up in a Great Depression, you may have those sort of belief systems ingrained within you, even though you may not be conscious of them. And so there are many ways of dealing with this. If there's a relationship problem, you can certainly go into your ancestral patterns and work on those things. But I think if you don't simultaneously work on them now in your physical life, then that is not enough. Because the way to repair, or even financial problems, let's use that as an example. If you are somebody who struggles financially and your ancestors did, using me as an example, let's say, I was born in India. And my grandfather was, I don't even remember exactly what he used to do, but I know that they lived in a very meager environment, a home environment. And I don't think he had very much money. My parents actually came to the United States and made money and sent it back to my grandparents. And so they built a very affluent home and things like that after that time. But I grew up in that environment of going from that poverty ancestry. And also my childhood was that way. My parents had that sort of poverty mindset because they both grew up in poverty. And so that mindset was still there in the ancestry, even though they were, we were a middle class family at that time. And they were doing well. Certainly by Indian standards, they were doing extraordinarily well. Yet that ancestry was there, and that transferred onto me. So now I can go back and repair that ancestry using spiritual healing modalities, and that's certainly one path. But I still have to walk the life, and I still have to take the steps to learn about money. And that's probably largely why I've had such an interest with macroeconomics and financial markets and things like that throughout my entire adult life, even when I was younger than that. So my process of going through that and failing and trying again and failing and trying again and failing over and over in my life, and each time failing a little less, and then improving and getting to a point where each time I fail and try again, I'm improving. That's how you repair those ancestral patterns. And by you repairing them, by living a fuller, better life yourself, that pattern now gets repaired in your ancestry as well. So your parents, your grandparents, that energy gets neutralized. It wouldn't be enough for me to go to a past life regression therapist and go back into my ancestry and rewrite those patterns. I also have to live it. And the same is true for relationships. We have to live it in order to improve it. We have to have better relationships now, even if we try and fail a million times. And as we improve, those ancestral patterns are rewritten as well. Same is true for health. Any of those things where you find yourself struggling in your life now because of a pattern that exists in your ancestry, rewriting those patterns is how you live your life. So by living better, you change those patterns. And that's what we all have to do in every area.
I think the question might come up, what happens if my partner doesn't want to improve? And I hear that all of the time is, we have people in the inner circle community, women who are spiritually advancing and they are in arguments with their relationships. The spouse is not willing to go on that inner journey with them. And I think that can be, really hard. But I can say what the guides always advise, and it is full transparency and consciousness. So we have to be really careful, I think, especially right now with Chiron and Aries and all the division we have on the planet, not to get involved in the argument. It's really the same thing in the world as it is in relationships. If we entangle ourselves in the argument or in the wrong timeline, we're not really going to do the timeline justice at all. So we have to expose all of ourselves. We have to be vulnerable and compassionate and conscious in expressing how we feel, even if that means we're not happy. Because ultimately, what I believe is if the relationship is going to come to an end, it must come to an end in the most conscious way possible. That doesn't mean that the other party is in agreement with that or conscious at all. It has to do with you, because if you truly want to attract the next and better relationship, how you leave every other relationship behind is the magnet or the glue between that one and the next. So if we want to get out of these repeating ancestral patterns, I think consciousness is the key, regardless of how difficult the relationship seems to be or is. Because in the third dimension, we've really been taught that we have to self-protect and put up boundaries and, fight for the things that we want. And not that these things are bad. I think obviously if we're in a relationship that is traumatic or somehow physically harmful, those boundaries are extremely important. But in the spiritual community, we talk about this stuff all the time energetically. We're going to put up boundaries because our partner is bringing home all this negative energy. And I don't think that actually helps the situation. So yes, I agree. We have to get on the physical plane and grounded in our earthly experience and really be willing to go into the discomfort of why our relationships are the way that they are, because the guides say pushing that envelope is kind of like speeding up the vibration or the timeline. Because I know a lot of people, they stay in relationships and they experience the same patterns again and again and again. And that's just resistance, right? So if we get out of the resistance and we, poke the sleeping tiger, in other words, and we're willing to go into our most uncomfortable place in a conscious and loving way, we're going to find ourselves in a new timeline regardless, because either that partner is willing to hear us at that level or a new partner is meant to come in. And I do agree with what you said about being alone. And I have experienced this also quite a bit in my private sessions, and I want to add a little spin to it. The guides say we're going through a very chaotic transition right now with a lot of interesting different vibrational speeds. People are coming in and out of certain timelines and dimensions, and we're moving very quickly through time space. And because of that, some of us who have been alone might be experiencing a lot of relationships really quickly that seem almost otherworldly. And I've had this too, where people have come to me in session and they've met a lot of partners, potential relationships that have felt otherworldly, significant, but ended up in tragedy or just didn't last. And I think that's what can happen in these energies is we're working through a lot of karma. We're purging density. We're evolving very quickly, and things are going to come in and out of our life. But that is never sustainable for a very long period of time. So while I'm sure people come in to experience being alone, I don't think that's our true organic divine plan. I think we are all here and meant to be in relationship, especially if we expect that we're going into a more unified collective.
Regarding, breaking up relationships, I think one thing that a lot of people who are in those circumstances, of course, breaking up a relationship, especially one that's been going on a long time, whether it be marriage or just a relationship, can be very catastrophic in the lives of two people who are going through it, especially if you share resources or homes or other things. And the thing that we need to keep in mind is whenever those things occur, whenever major breakups happen in relationships, it's always in our cycles. So it's not as if we should have done things differently, and if we had, the relationship would have been better. It was just a circumstance that was meant to play out at that time, and that's why it's playing out at that time. You wouldn't see a breakup of a relationship in a time in a person's life where the cycles didn't reflect that. So none of these things are random. And even though you as the ego self, having the human experience, may not know this or may not have wished that upon yourself to have that turbulent period of your life, it was nonetheless something your soul would have chosen to have as an experience at that time, or else it wouldn't be in your cycles. So we always have to understand that we are heading in the right direction. Even when we're in the midst of catastrophic changes in our lives, those are things that our soul put in place in our human experience in order to have those journeys at that time. So relationships will continue to evolve in that way, and you'll always end up in the right place, whatever that is. But once those circumstances occur, I think one of the things that I believe is a problem in our society in general is that we've talked about this in many Channel Revelation shows and other shows as well, where we've grown up in a society that is very much centered around worship of others or idol worship. And idol worship takes form in many ways. It could be worshiping our leaders, our presidents. It could be worshiping celebrities. It could be worshiping social media influencers. It could be any number of those factors. And that sort of moved us away from realizing our own potential. So especially nowadays, because society's degraded so much, especially since the 1970s, we have entered a period of time where majority of human beings, especially the younger ones, have diminished their self-respect and lost their sense of ambition and drive to be extraordinary in whatever way that is for them. And I find that if we became extraordinary in our own unique ways, that relationships would just naturally happen. I'll give you an example. I watch a lot of videos on YouTube and other platforms, and a lot of things I'm interested in are macroeconomics and things like that, very grounded topics, as well as spiritual and archaeology and things like that. But there's one individual who is an expert in the macroeconomic space, and he shared a personal story in one of his videos recently where now he retired at a very young age, and he shares a story about how when he was very young, he retired and he lived in this very affluent apartment building. And it just so happened that a lot of basketball stars lived in the same apartment building. So over time, he got to be friends with them and just hung out with them on a regular basis. And he would share how he and his friends would get together in the bar and and right after a game, all of these stars or celebrities in the basketball space would hang out in this bar, and he would be there with them. And he said that there would be 100 beautiful women who were lined up to talk to these guys, and these women would do anything. And quite often, they'd follow the men home to their apartments afterwards, even if the men didn't want anything to do with them. So now what I got from this story was not what may be apparent, but it is that when people do something extraordinary, now in this case, it's also an example of idol worship, but it shows that now the vast majority of men, especially when they're younger, tend to be very insecure about asking a girl out or going out on a date, for example. But these men who are the sports stars experience an entirely different phenomena. They have too many women who are pursuing them, and they don't even have to pursue any of them. And on the one hand, this might look at as celebrity worship, but on the other hand, I also see it as these individuals have stepped out in a way that they are drawn to do. In this case, it may be basketball, and do something extraordinary in such a way that other people have such a level of admiration for them that they want to be with them in a relationship or just be around them. And I think each of us can do that in our own individual lives, in our own individual ways. Now, that maybe somebody's a rocket scientist and they're very nerdy and not very social people, but when you become extraordinary in that field that you are drawn to and that you're excited about, you're going to shine in that space, and other people are going to look up to you and are going to see that extraordinary nature part of you. And I think this is something that's missing from our society. Is in many respects we've been led down this path of where we depend more and more on the state for the things that we depend on, and we've been diminished as individuals to where most people, they find themselves in carbon copy career paths, or and they do the same thing other people do, as opposed to tapping into what makes them special and really becoming good at that thing. So I think that if all of us were to discover what that is, and I talk about this in a lot of our conversations about how finding what's extraordinary about us that we're really good at doing, that we love doing, that other people need, that if we focus on that area and we do that really well, then other people are drawn to us in that area. Now, that doesn't mean it's something in the public stage. You could be a really good gardener, or you could be really good at any number of things. You could be a member of some community that gets together and goes hiking. But in whatever thing that interests you, if you become extraordinary in that area, then other people will see that confidence and will see that strength in that area and will be attracted to you. It doesn't really matter what you physically look like. If these basketball players were unattractive, they would still have people lined up at the door to want to talk to them or to be in a relationship with them. Same is true in friendships. When you stand out in a particular area, in whatever way that is for you, other people are going to be drawn to you because they want to learn from you, or they want to speak with you, or they just think you're very interesting. If you look at a lot of social media influencers in the recent decades, as an example, because this has become a phenomenon on platforms like TikTok, and there are a lot of social media influencers on TikTok who look very unusual or even a little weird sometimes, or in some cases not very attractive in what we would consider in mainstream society as attractive, yet they have millions of followers. And because they created something where they put themselves out there in that way. Now, I'm not suggesting you would do that, but what I'm suggesting is that the missing piece to being attractive to others is not a factor of age. So it doesn't, a lot of people feel like, well, I'm too old to be in a relationship who'd be interested in me, or I'm not good looking enough to be in a relationship, so who'd be interested in me? Um, those factors certainly do help. I mean, if you're attractive, of course, other people are going to find you attractive and look at you more in terms of what is attractive in society today. In some more ancient societies, they had different measures of attractiveness that we would not consider attractive today, on the mass scale anyway. So those things can change culturally over time. So it's not really a physical thing. It's really more of that sense of inner confidence that we have that draws other people to us in any form of relationship, that makes us interesting because we are interesting people. We become interesting people by tapping into what gives us passion and fascination about life and the universe, and putting all of our energy into developing that talent in that area. And other people will be drawn to that, and certainly relationship opportunities will come as well. So I think a lot of people who are alone, who are wanting a relationship partner, may be missing the essential component, which is it's really about us. It's about us becoming extraordinary. Built into that is that mechanism of relationship. So if all of us became extraordinary in those ways that we are meant to be, then the relationship would just become a natural manifestation of that, or side effect of that. And that, I think, is missing from our society today on a greater and greater level, because we've sort of had that trained out of us. We've moved toward a society where we are dependent on government and the system to take care of us and to provide our needs, and we've defaulted to this sort of cubicle society where everybody does the same carbon copy thing as everybody else. We don't really explore our natural innate abilities and talents and gifts, and as a result, we never become extraordinary in this life. And I think that's what makes us less attractive. So if that speaks to anyone who's listening, then I think we just need to continue to explore that as a component of being in a relationship. It's not just going out on dates or joining a dating site. That's not going to solve the problem, because you have to be someone who's interesting if you're going to go on a dating site to have other people interested in you. And it's, from my experience, from a lifetime of observing other people and watching cycles, I don't think it's really as much physically oriented as we think it is. Physical can certainly change based on a person, what a person becomes in their life, and how much they expand on those talents and abilities they are drawn to.
I think we get caught up in the spiritual community in trying to create magnetism through various modalities like Kundalini or meditation or even visualization of the partner we want and trying to manifest, when the true magnetism is really here on the physical plane in who you become and who you are. And I can attest to what you are saying, but I think it even goes beyond doing something extraordinary. It has more to do with stepping into your truth. And, there has been a big cap on that in the third dimension because it has all been very vanilla. We're all meant to be the same and do the same things. And that's what we're breaking out of. And I think that's why relationship has become stagnant and why people aren't finding the right person, because we have a ways to go, in blossoming into our truth and who we were born to be and what we're here to do that we really love. So I think it's more than success or, building some type of a spiritual mission, which are all really good things. I think pursuing what you love and what brings you joy is a natural form of magnetism that is going to interest other people and draw other people into your world, and not just people. I think it draws the right people, and that's the big miss. So if we're not living our authentic life, we're going to end up with a lot of partner possibilities that are going to fall short of what we came here to experience. And I think that's truly what's been going on for a very long period of time. So the more and more we're willing to step into our truth and our authenticity, we will find more options, because it's natural that we are here to fit into a specific collective puzzle. And yeah, I do think that ultimately there is the perfect partner for us, even though the relationship isn't always perfect, because if we are here with something very unique, a unique contribution to offer humanity, then there is got to be someone out there that is the other half of that contribution in some way. And we are somewhat like that. In We are both different in our interests. We're both different in our skill set. We have very similar beliefs, though, and it all complements each other. And I think some of us are out there looking for people to resonate with in every way. And we don't always see eye to eye on everything, but it enriches the experience, because I learn a lot from Ethann, and I think Ethann learns a lot from the work that I do, and it really just helps both of us to continue to grow. It enhances our collective mission as well as our individual paths, and I think that's what we're going towards as we move into the future with relationship. Is it's really not about what can I get out of this relationship. I want someone who's going to cherish me and love me, and then that stuff is important, but how together do we enhance each other's uniqueness and then receive something really beneficial from that continues to enhance the relationship. And I think you can take that model all the way up to the collective, because ultimately, to me, that's what unity consciousness or community is truly all about. Is we're all here with something very valuable, and unfortunately a lot of us have lost faith in who we are. We've forgotten along the way that there is something really beautiful and important within us. And until we discover that and we put it into action, finding the right partner is going to be quite impossible.
Well, that's a good place to wrap it up for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. And you can also watch us on various other platforms, of course, especially if you're seeing ads on YouTube. We're also on Rumble and various podcast platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And our live streams will be coming back soon as well, so stay tuned for that. So we'll see you again next week for another Channel Revelations.